Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Julie Hibben with IDPH. Thanks for joining us this morning to talk about community readiness and the triethnic readiness process. Just a few reminders before we dive into the information we're going to cover today. Please make sure that your line is muted, and you can do that by clicking on the GoToMeeting dialog box that's on the right-hand side of your screen, and there is either a phone or a microphone next to your name in the attendees section. So you can click on that and mute your line that way, and then if you'd like to speak, just click on that icon again and you'll be unmuted. So if you could just keep your lines muted during our discussions, that will just cut down on background noise, so we appreciate that. And then feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation today. I'll be monitoring the chat box, so you can either type in your question, or I'm sure that we'll stop at different points throughout our time together and just open it up for questions. So feel free to ask any that you have. Also a reminder that this webinar is going to be recorded and be posted to the SPF SIG website in the training section. So it should be hopefully posted by tomorrow. So if you have someone from your agency or maybe someone from your LU group or coalition that is going to be helping you with the triethnic readiness process and they couldn't participate live today, the recording will be available for them. So Claire Jones is a capacity coach with our project, and she's going to be providing an overview of this process today. So I will turn it over to her.
Thanks, Julie. Good morning, everybody. I'm excited that we have a nice group on the call today, so hopefully that'll lead to lots of good discussions and good sharing and good questions. My first question this morning actually is, and please either answer via the chat box or just go ahead and jump in over your phone. How many of you have experience already with using community readiness, whether it's with this project or another project? All right, so it looks like either Mary Beth is the only one that's had some experience, or she's the only one that wanted to jump in and answer the question. So I'm guessing that at least some of you then maybe haven't had experience with this previously, and I know a portion of coordinators weren't here, thanks Betsy, weren't here at the beginning of the project. So I'm going to really the purpose of this is to go through what community readiness is, why we do it, and then we're going to spend most of our time talking about the nuts and bolts of how to do it in your community. You know, how do you find people to help with it? How do you actually go through the interviews and the scoring and some good things to keep in mind, and then what you do with the information, what we want everyone to do with that information after the process. And so please feel free. You guys know, by now I'm super flexible, so jump in really at any time if you have a question, or if you have some advice to share, or if there's a struggle that you've encountered that you think we could all do some brainstorming around, or have some ideas about that would help everybody. That will be great. So I'm going to figure out the technology here. All right. And oh my gosh, I listened to my last recording. I'm going to try really hard not to say 500 times on this one, so we're going to see how that goes. So really, I did it all right. Really, readiness is the degree that it's really about assessing where is your community at in terms of being ready to tackle an issue or tackle a problem. And it's really an important piece in creating community change, to be able to think about where you're going to start your intervention or where you're going to start with a community really depends on where they're at to begin with. And it also really depends not just on where you think they're at, or your knowledge or the knowledge of those who are closely tied to the issue is, but it's all about the perception of your community. The perception is really the reality in this case. And so you may have some great leadership in your community. You may have some good agencies and resources available that are tackling an issue. But if the broader community isn't aware of them, that also gives you a lot of information about where to start and where to begin your education and where to begin your intervention. It may be that as you go through your planning, what you decide to do is to raise more awareness because there are things in place and you have to make more people knowledgeable about them, as opposed to maybe a community where you find out there isn't many resources and people aren't aware that it's really an issue. That's a whole different starting place as far as raising awareness around the issue in and of itself. This model itself, there's a couple out there. The one that the Department of Public Health has chosen to use for this project is the Tri-Ethnic Community Readiness Model. And if you're interested in going right to the source, the website is listed here on this web page with the creators, and you can go and find out kind of a little bit more information about it if that interests you. Fortunately for us, I think the department has put together some really nice resources and made them available on the workstation and also as part of the closeout guidance. And so you also can connect directly with that, which is really nice. So really what we're doing is assessing the community's readiness for change, looking at increasing community capacity, and creating a climate that is going to make the change possible. And there are quite a few, the thing that's interesting about this particular model is it doesn't just kind of give you one number and say, okay, this is the one number of where your community is at. There are multiple dimensions that it measures readiness across. So as I said earlier, it may be that your community efforts are going well, but your community knowledge of the efforts is really low. It may be that you have a few key leaders on board, but the climate in your community isn't ready to really embrace this issue yet. And so what's nice about this model is it really breaks the readiness out by each of these dimensions so that you can do some more detailed looking and planning at the information that you have and how you can use that. Once you get the information, what you'll end up with at the end of the process for each of those dimensions, and then overall as a score on a scale somewhere from 1 to 9. And so 1 is really that the community has no awareness. 9 all the way up to 9, which is a high level of community ownership. There's really some sophisticated things happening, and people are very connected and involved, and action is happening on the issue. And then what's nice is you can match that with resources that are available out there that then tell you, okay, if you're at a 3, here are some good strategies to use within your community. And so maybe if your community is really at that denial or vague awareness, you're going to want to start with some one-on-one conversations, some small group things. If your community is up at a 7 or an 8, then you're going to want to be doing different kinds of efforts and providing lots of more detailed information and education for people to take more ownership and really engage in the work that's happening. More things are going to transfer to other community members and coalition members as opposed to maybe happening just through a couple of professionals within the community. And so it's really a great tool for giving you that snapshot, informing your as part of your assessment, and then also becoming a key element in your planning as you're deciding what kind of intervention to use. And now for us, is becoming an important part of evaluation as this project is coming to a close to see how that needle moved in terms of readiness throughout the project, and then to keep going in that circular motion of the SPF, that then as efforts continue on in your community, they can roll that back up into assessment again, and they can use that as part of sustainability planning and saying, okay, so now here where we're at the end of this project, where does that mean we need to go next? What do we need to focus on, and what will we have what will we have success with sustaining? So this is the process in a nutshell. The first thing you need to do is define your community. And in the case of SPF, for the most part, that's been defined for everyone. A community in the SPF SIG project has been defined as your county. There may be a few exceptions to that. I believe there was at least one county at the beginning of the project that had decided, with some collaborative effort with a coalition that they were working with, that they actually wanted to conduct two sets of community readiness in two areas. They wanted to look at the more urban county seat, and then they also wanted to look at a more rural area of the community, because they felt that the readiness might be different in those two places, as well as once they got the information and as they moved along in their planning, there might be different interventions and different implementation that they wanted to use in different places. So you may want to go back and look, which really I recommend that you do anyway. Go back and find the community readiness that was done at the beginning of the project and look and see where it was at, who was interviewed, what the summary said, kind of what the information told you, and that'll be a good starting point for you as you move on to complete the assessment again. The requirement from the Department of Public Health is to do the two sets of surveys. So one is around underage drinking, and then the second is around binge drinking, and we'll get to that in a little more detail as we move further on through the hour here. But their requirement is for you to do an assessment of the overall county. So that would be up to your community and your coalition if you decided that you wanted to gather more information than that. The next step is to conduct key respondent interviews, and we're going to talk a little about that a little bit more in depth in a few minutes here. You're going to go through the scoring process, and we'll talk in more detail about that as well. And again, then look at the readiness strategies that really best match the information that you come up with. And at this point in the project, that would really also be about deciding if there are partners who will be able to carry that on past the end of the project. So I stated some of this already. Why go through reassessment at this point in the project? And really, it's for these three reasons, and probably some other reasons as well. You're reassessing to see how far you've come since the assessment was done at the beginning of the project. It's a great way to celebrate success with your coalition or with your community, to be able to really demonstrate the progress that has been made throughout the project. And it's another tool to help you in planning for sustaining efforts and outcomes. So does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about actually doing the interviews, which is really sort of the heart of the whole process. For this process, the Department of Public Health has determined that you will need to interview a minimum of 6 individuals. There are 26 questions, and what's nice is they're already identified for you if you haven't looked at this yet. This is the guidance, the closeout. Sorry, I'm trying to move things on my screen so I can see what I'm doing here. This is the document that IDPH has provided on all the things that you need to know to close out your project. And this is on page 4. And is a great tool that really shows you what you need to go through to do the community readiness. It has these resources linked right within the document. And then once you scroll down, it lists all the interview questions for you. So you already have all of the questions already lined out, as opposed to maybe some of you that have engaged in this process through maybe the Comprehensive Prevention Grant or something else that you have done that that you needed to actually you have some ability with this model to tweak the questions, and so in this case, IDPH is providing them for you. The expectation is that the interviews will each take about 30 to 60 minutes, and you really want to find a cross-section of people throughout the community to interview. You want this, as we said in the beginning, to really be a good picture of the perception of your community around your issue. And so You can look at any of these different sectors, you know, asking youth, asking someone from your faith community, asking someone involved in local or city government, someone involved in law enforcement. Those 6 people should be a nice cross-section of your community. And you need to choose 6 people for each of the priority areas. So you'll have 6 people interviewed for underage drinking and 6 people interviewed for the binge drinking set of questions. You may not interview anyone who was interviewed at the start of the project, which is also why it's important that you hopefully be able to put your hands on the documentation that happened at the beginning of the project so you can find out who was interviewed previously. You cannot interview anyone who's a current member of the coalition or the collaborative council. You really don't want the people interviewing to be part of the choir. You want them to be part of the larger community. And you cannot interview anyone directly contracted to provide services for SPF SIG. So if there's someone specific within law enforcement who has been subcontracted to provide services, if there is someone like maybe your LU chair that you've contracted to provide services, they should not be the ones completing the interviews. So a few things to consider. First of all, you have to figure out where to find these people. And I definitely would suggest going to your collaborative council, going to your LU, maybe even asking other folks at your prevention office or wherever you might work who they would think would be somebody that'd be willing to give 30 to 60 minutes of their time to sit down with the interviewer in person or on the phone and to go through the questions. And hopefully they should be able to help you come up with a good list to start from. It's also really nice, and I know you guys have definitely probably learned this already through the project, but it's even nicer when you can get that person to go ahead and make the ask for you. So someone on your coalition who says, oh yeah, I know a city council member and I think they'd be a great person for you to interview. If you can have them who are, you know, if they already have that relationship, if you can have them be the ones to ask that question, then hopefully the likelihood that they're going to say yes and commit to being part of this maybe will be even higher. And so that's always nice when you can make that happen. Thinking about who will conduct the interviews, you need to find at least one person to do the interview. You need to find one person to do the interviews for the underage drinking and someone to do the interviews for the binge drinking set of questions, preferably having just one person, and you could have one person do them all if they were willing to commit to that. But having just one person do the whole set of interviews is really preferable because then you know that the questions are being asked in similar ways and that the process is really similar. So as you sit down to score all of the 6 interviews for each set, you know you're really comparing apples to apples within that interview. Thinking about how and where they'll be conducted, that may be partly up to the person that you have doing the interviewing and partly depending on what works best for the person who's being interviewed. I think there's some pros and cons to both going and meeting someone in person as well as doing it over the phone. Sometimes going and meeting with someone in person means that they're going to be at a location that they feel really comfortable with, so they might be more likely to feel like they're able to be honest in their answers and really share some valuable information with you. On the other hand, sometimes that then adds an extra burden of time and travel for the person that's doing the interviewing, especially when they're conducting interviews with 6 different people. Doing the interviews on the phone can have some positive benefits. Sometimes it allows for the question to be asked and maybe eliminates some bias that might happen on the part of the person that's doing the interviewing. So you don't see that person's body language, you don't see their facial expressions as the person's answering the question, the person on the phone is asking the question, and then capturing the answers from the person who's being interviewed. On the other hand, if maybe those 2 people don't know each other previous to this, it might be a little bit of a challenge if the person is not as comfortable answering questions being asked by someone that they don't know when that's happening over the phone. So I think that there's some pros and cons to both, and certainly if anyone has a thought about what works better, definitely feel free to type it in the chat box or jump in from your experience. I think, too, also thinking about how your answers will be captured. I know for myself, sometimes I have a challenge if I'm facilitating a meeting or I'm trying to interview someone. Sometimes it's hard for me to listen to the answers and make sure that I'm asking all of the questions and also be capturing all of the notes at the same time. And so if possible, you may want to consider having a second person who's there just to simply be the note taker. You know, maybe you have an intern or a work study or a college student or somebody that, or someone additional from your coalition that has the availability that they could also come and take some notes. We also had a few people in the original process at the beginning of the project that found it really helpful to use a digital tape recorder, and the person that they were interviewing was comfortable with that. And so they were able to record the interview and then go back and transcribe it later, and they said that that was really helpful also. One other thing that I would also ask you to consider is to spend some time with the person who's going to do the interviewing and talk to them a little bit through the process. It's really nice that the questions are already right there for you in front of you. But you want to make it clear to them that while there shouldn't be any additional discussion about the answers, this is a person that you want them to ask the question and then record the answer as the person gives it. You don't want to have them kind of interjecting information or getting into a discussion with them about what they think about the answer the person gave them. At the same time, though, they definitely can ask clarifying questions or repeat the question if they feel like they haven't gotten the answer. I had an experience a couple years ago with scoring some community readiness surveys, and the person who had been doing the interviewing wasn't really as familiar with the process, and so really just went straight down, asked the question, wrote the answer, asked the question, wrote the answer. And as I went to do the scoring, there were a couple of questions that the person actually hadn't answered the question. And so the question might have said something about asking about resources that are available to address underage drinking in the community, and this person maybe started to give an answer and then got sidetracked and started talking about an experience that they had with someone in the community or something that happened that to somebody they knew, and really didn't answer the actual question that was in front of them, and then it made it a challenge later as we were going back to do the scoring and you're looking for keywords and phrases. The information wasn't there to be able to adequately look at it because they actually hadn't answered the question. And the same thing also happens that there were a couple of questions that the person gave a very short, one-word answer. They might have said, yeah, I think so. And so, again, it was challenging because there really wasn't enough of an answer to be able to go through the scoring rubric and kind of pick things out and figure out where that was at. And so to be able to say to the person, well, can you tell me more about that? Or if the person is asking the question and realizes that the answer doesn't really match the original question, just re-ask the question. Oh, that was really helpful. And can you now tell me what you think about the services that are provided in the community? And so I think taking some time to talk to the interviewer beforehand and go through that step by step of how it should flow and where you can do that re-asking and clarifying and where you need to leave the discussion for another time. And Debbie had brought up on our last webinar also reminding them that they may want to interject something as the interview is happening. that you need to wait until the end or after the interview has happened to say that. And so if this person is saying, you know, there's nothing going on in our community and nobody ever talks about this, and you know there's actually a pretty strong coalition and this person might be a great person to get involved with that, you need to wait until the interview is entirely completed and over and then set that aside, and then, you know, could feel free to say, hey, and by the way, you know, we do have a coalition, you're welcome to come check it out, or maybe that happens in a follow-up phone call later, but shouldn't happen within the context of the interview itself. So Betsy asked a great question, which is there a certain skill set necessary for the interviews? Do they need knowledge and prevention? Absolutely not. I think really anyone that is interested, whether it's from your coalition or your agency or a community member or a LU member who has the time to go out and conduct the interviews, and you think that, you know, they will be a capable person to get there and to go through the list of questions and to document the answers. Really, anybody can do that. I think it's more just taking a few minutes with them to explain their role, that really the purpose is to capture this person's perception of what's going on in the community. And so what they should be doing is simply asking the questions and recording the answers. Except, like I said, in the case that maybe if they feel like the person hasn't really answered the question, you could ask the question or restate the question again. If you feel like the person gave a very short answer, you could say, can you tell me more about that? Does that help? I don't know if, and it looks like maybe Betsy got cut off the audio of the call, so I'm not sure. Betsy, did you hear that answer? Does anybody else have any questions about this part, about the interviewers? Or maybe Debbie or Julie, do you want to add anything that I might have missed?
This is Debbie, and I appreciated what you added.
Okay, thank you. What if someone really has no opinion on something? Janet, that's a good question. I mean, if they really have no opinion, that's certainly fine to move on, and that certainly is good information in and of itself. I mean, if they're answering the question saying, yeah, I don't know anything about that, that is an answer in itself that this person doesn't know about the issue or this person isn't aware of resources, and so you can document that as the answer and move on. In the case of the ones that I was scoring, it was more that the person just gave like this real short sort of vague answer, and it seemed like there could have been room if you had said, oh, well, tell me what you mean, or can you tell me a little bit more about that? There would have been like a whole nother, you know, paragraph of information to be able to look at. But absolutely, if the person really doesn't know or doesn't have an opinion, then you document the answer for that question and you move on to the next one. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, good question. Anybody else have a question about interviewing? Where to find? And anybody have anything they want to share about who you asked to conduct interviews, or something that maybe worked really well for you with this part of the process? Okay, well, and we'll have time for questions at the end too. So if something comes to you, definitely feel free to jump in. So as far as scoring goes, so the interviews get completed and then they need to be scored. And so you will need 2 scorers for both of the priority areas. So you're going to need 2 scorers to score all the ones that were done on underage drinking. You're going to need 2 scorers to go through and do all the ones that were done on binge drinking. And they should not be the same person or persons that conducted the interviews. I suppose unless if if someone volunteers to do the interviews for binge drinking, they certainly could volunteer to do the scoring for underage drinking. But they shouldn't be the person they shouldn't be scoring interviews that they conducted. This should be separate from that process. And the same for finding scorers. I would say look to your LU, look to your collaborative council or coalition. A lot of comprehensive prevention staff have experience in this, and so that's something to talk to your agency or your supervisor about and see if you have someone that works with you that can use their time in that way. So once you have your scorers, first they're going to work independently to score each of the dimensions. So you're going to give them a packet that has copies of all of the answers to all of the interview questions, and they're going to go through with the guidance document, and they're going to, and it's really very well laid out. I think the resource from Tri-Ethnic as far as how to go through and score each dimension of readiness and what to look for is very easy to follow through. And so they're going to go through the document, they're going to go through each of the interviews, and they're going to use the scoring template, and they're going to come up with their own individual scoring. And I would say, in my experience, and it seems like there was some agreement on the last call, it probably takes 1 to 2 hours to do that first round of going through and doing the scoring as an individual. Then the 2 scorers for that priority area need to come together, and they'll probably, again, expect to spend about an hour or 2 going through each of them, and what they need to do is come to consensus on the score. And this is interesting because you want them to know that it really should be there should be some conversation and some discussion around this. So if I've gone through and I have a dimension that I, gave the score a 2, and the other person who's doing the scoring gave it a 6, that doesn't mean that when we get together we say, great, we'll give it a 4. What it means is I then say, well, I gave it a 2 because, the direction said I should be looking for this, and I don't really see it there, and so I really felt like this was a 2. But maybe the other person says, well, but I read that they said X, Y, Z, and I feel like that really does mean that they should be, up here where the 6 is. And so between the 2 of you, you decide, okay, you know what, I think you're right. I think it should be closer to a 6. Or the other person says, I don't really see it, but I think I could see a 3. And so the 2 of you work together to come to consensus on each of the scores. And then there's a worksheet that goes with the scoring that then lets you calculate each of the dimensions and then the overall stage of readiness, which at that point is really all about the math and just coming up with the averages. Is there any benefit or drawback to having the same 2 people who scored the original interviews complete this one as well? Mary, I think that is a great question, and I don't know that I actually, really have an answer for that. I don't know if someone else wants to jump in. I guess my thought would be certainly having someone who's familiar and comfortable with the process would be a benefit. I've definitely found that in the past. I think it's nice if you have someone who's already familiar with how to do it, certainly. And if you can get that person from the beginning of the project to commit to doing it again, I think that's great. I can't think of any drawbacks to having the same person. Can anyone else? And yeah, Debbie, thanks for pointing out some comp agencies have also been successful in training college students to conduct the interviews. And I know that we have done that also. We've utilized work studies or volunteers sometimes to be the ones for different parts of the process, whether we worked with them to make sure that they were comfortable going out and conducting the interviews. We've had them be the ones that that then transcribed. If we used a digital recorder, they then took it and typed out all the answers so that it would be in a concise document for the scoring to happen. And so that's a great idea as well. And then you'll see on the sheet that you're going to return to IDPH, one of the things that it also asks for is, whether there's impressions or unique outcomes or qualifying statements. This is just a chance to maybe capture, the flavor of some of the interviews. If there was something that someone said that came from their interview that you think that really is kind of a good representation. So maybe someone, you can quote them as having said, I think this really is a big issue in our community, and it frustrates me that none of my neighbors really even seem to know it exists, or whatever it might be. It's just it's nice sometimes to have some of those impressions to add to your survey. One thing I would caution you about, though, is thinking about how this document will be shared and whether you're sharing it back with your coalition, whether it's obviously it's going to IDPH. And so you want to make sure that people's anonymity is going to be preserved. One of the things that's nice with community readiness is because multiple people are being interviewed and all of that information is then averaged and put into a score, it's nice for people to feel like they can be really honest about what you see in your community. And so you just want to make sure that you're being respectful of that. So if you're pulling out a quote and you live in a small community, you don't want it to be something, a law enforcement official told us XYZ, and it's going to be clear to everyone in your coalition who reads it that they know exactly who said that. And so there's something to be thinking of when you're including those statements and comments. Does anyone else have any questions about scoring or anything that's still kind of popping up for you around any of the process? Julie, do you want to talk a little bit about the next couple slides as far as next steps go?
Sure. So just a reminder, and those of you who participated in our webinar yesterday probably have heard this already, but just to clarify again, all of your closeout documents will be due January 23rd, and this is just to ensure that we have enough time to look it over and make sure that everything is clear and we don't have any questions, or if you do need to make revisions, we can do that before the project officially ends. So in the guidance document, there is a document or a sheet that you will be submitting for the triethnic readiness process. And so you'll be sending that to us. You can email it to me, and then we will look it over and let you know if we have specific questions. And I think maybe that was that specific document was mentioned already. So we also want you to make sure that you take the time to share the results of this process with your coalition and other stakeholders in your community. If you are having challenges as far as finding your initial scores, those can be found on the SPF SIG website under assessment, and there's a folder in the assessment section of the website that is called Community Readiness. And so click on that, and there's a spreadsheet that has all the scores from every county for both priority issues. So that information is listed there. But we certainly want you to share this information. We hope that you will see an increase in readiness over the past 3 years, even if it's really small. We think that's a success. Many of our counties started the project with some really low readiness, so we're certainly hopeful that even though there hasn't been a lot of time that's passed, that you'll at least see some increases in readiness through the work that you've done. So, and then also be thinking about how this work can be incorporated into your sustainability processes. Maybe if you share this information through your coalition, there's some things that they can do to help continue to increase readiness around these issues. Also, your prevention agency that you work with, they can certainly keep providing education and information in the communities about these specific issues. So it's definitely something that hopefully will continue even though SPF SIG is coming to an end. And then if you have specific questions, Debbie is, I would say, our expert when it comes to the triethnic readiness process. You can certainly email her and she'll, I'm sure, be happy to answer any questions that you have. So you can email me, but I'll probably refer you to Debbie just because she's been through a lot of training on this process and really does have a lot of knowledge. And then if you want additional information, and I think Claire has referenced this website already, but this is the Triethnic Center, and there's lots of good information about the triethnic readiness process here on this website. So feel free to access that if you'd like some additional resources. So are there other questions about this process or anything that you're wondering about? Feel free to jump in either verbally or you can use the chat box if you'd like.
Well, so I'll throw a question out for those of you who have gone through this process before. Oh, wait, Joe has a question. If you schedule with any other interviewers helping through most of the process, do you have any advice? Joe, can you I guess I'm not sure on your question as far as, are you talking about trying to find folks to conduct the interviews? So really, this is a coordinator. I would say, and Debbie and Julie, I guess, jump in here too. Certainly, as a coordinator, you will have some participation. You can have some participation in this process, and I think that's also for you to look at what else you have on your calendar and where priorities need to be and what you have going on. And so you, as the coordinator, may decide that you're going to be the one to conduct the interviews, or you're going to be one of the people doing the scoring if that's what ends up working best in your community. But you can't have one person doing all the parts, and so this process really does require that you find several people within your whether it's your LU or whether it's your collaborative council, or whether you work within your comp agency to ask if there's other prevention staff that can help you with the project. This is one of those times that you can't do this. You can't do this on your own. It definitely involves some engagement from some other folks. Does that make sense? Oh, you said you understand. Thank you. Debbie or Julie, do you want to add anything to that?
No, you said it clearly.
Okay. And thanks for asking that, Joe, because for putting yourself out there, because I do think that, I mean, obviously that's been a struggle for a lot of communities is really getting some engagement. And this is this, in some ways, I think this task is a little bit of a hard ask because you're asking someone to commit a good chunk of time. I mean, if you're asking someone to conduct the interviews for one of the priority areas, you're asking them for at least 6 hours of their time, plus, if there's any travel or whatever it might be. At the same time, what I think is nice about this is it's also a distinct time-bound task. And so there may be people on your coalition, or there may be people that you're connecting with through your work that haven't wanted to commit to coming to a meeting every month. They haven't wanted to commit to being part of an ongoing committee or project, but those might be the people that you can say, hey, I know you think this is important too. Would you commit to just helping us with this one project? And you may find that people are really willing to do that. I know that was the case for us and some of the readiness that I've been involved in doing, that we found someone who actually was interested but couldn't make it to coalition meetings and was like, great, this is a way that I can help. I can spend, 6 hours over the next month helping out with this project, and then I can maybe get involved in other ways another time, but this is one thing that I can do.
Now, this is Debbie. That's a great idea, Claire, and I'd be glad to brainstorm with Joe offline at another time if it would help to talk about more specifics in his area.
Great, thank you. So, I mean, for those of you who have done community readiness already, what are some tips that you would suggest? I mean, what are things that you found were really helpful in making this process work in your community?
Well, this is Mary Beth, and I think I'm the only one on the call that right now that said they had any experience with this. But I can't really think of a good answer to your question, Claire.
But thanks for putting yourself out there. And I think it was you and Betsy, and I know there's a couple names on here that have been around for a little bit, so my guess is maybe they've been involved. I was,
Yeah.
I mean, I think those tips and things that come from, folks who have done it, like I said, from when we've done it, having, college students to help out, or asking, laying it out there at a coalition meeting, hey, we got to find 6 people to do this, let's brainstorm who we can think of, and then having 6 coalition members, or if you have 6, maybe having 3 ask 2, then asking each of those people to go and ask someone. That was something that we found really helpful. I mean, it doesn't have to be like rocket science. I mean, what was something that you did that you just thought went really well?
I think it was more of a benefit to myself in doing this. One of my least favorite things to do is to make phone calls to people. So just making those 12 phone calls to set up the appointments. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
No.
Yep.
Oh, okay, sorry. I've got a thing that says I might be having network problems. Okay, but, and then going and talking to those 12 people, getting some more information about the county, and also having that opportunity to connect with them after the interview was good. One helpful bit of advice that I would give is to ask them to block out that full hour and say that it might not take that long, but please be prepared in case it does.
Great. Yeah, that's helpful. And tell me a little bit more, because this came up on another call the other day too, about you said you try to plan to follow up with them after as well. So does that mean you go back and share the results with them, or do you go back and try to get them involved? Like, what did that look like?
Actually, at the end of the interview, I ask if they are interested in joining the coalition and getting more information about that. And now we're in a different situation than our county, so I would then be able to give their information to our coalition facilitator. Used to be me. I was doing it all. But fortunately now we have more staff on board. So that would be what I would do, and also coming to them for resources in their community if I need, if I need questions about the community, answers to those, or referrals for other people who might be interested.
Yeah, we've talked about that, I think, on some of our calls, even just about capacity building and things. I mean, when I've gone to work in this is sort of an aside, but I know it keeps coming up for folks. When I've gone to work in a community, I think one of the best things, that I've done, or that staff that I've worked with have done, have just, said to, one person that you could find, tell me 5 people I should go meet in this community, and you go meet those 5, and you have coffee with them, and you talk about your project, and you find out what they do, and then you ask those people, can you tell me 2 other people you think I should meet? And it is the best way to kind of figure out who's who and be connecting people with your project. And so I think it's a great habit to make, whether it's someone you've interviewed, whether it's someone you're sitting next to at a Board of Health meeting, whatever it might be, always having that conversation of, and what can you tell me about the community I should know, and who do you think I should go talk to, and who should we be connecting with? As after the interview is completed, I think those are all great things to continually be asking and always building capacity. Thanks for that.
Yeah, there's probably a reason that the SPF is a flower. All of these things kind of run into each other.
Exactly. Exactly.
This is Debbie. I think it should be an easy sell to get other people from the comprehensive agencies to work with you if at all possible, if you need that person power too, because with the idea of competition coming up next spring, this is really good information, and these 2 issues are not going to go away, and they'll probably be things that we'll be working on for a long time. So this should be of interest to the whole comprehensive agency, not just to the SPF SIG project.
Which actually makes me think, Debbie, too, one of the calls that we had, I think it was earlier this week, there was some talk about collaboration with public health and the Board of Health, and that they're in the process, or they're getting ready again to look at their community health needs assessment and creating their health improvement plan. And so, the same as, again, it's like these similar themes throughout SPF is, what's the ask that shows that shared outcome for someone else. And so right now for comp, it's going to the staff and saying, hey, this is going to help both of us because you're going to need this information when you go to rewrite your grant. You could go say the same thing to public health. Hey, do you have someone who could give us, a few hours of their time to help us score this? Because this would be really good information with you as you're doing your community health needs assessment to know how ready this community is to deal with underage and binge drinking. And my guess is in a majority of our communities, those are also priority areas for public health to be working on.
That's a great addition.
Thank you. Yeah, it came up. One of the coordinators actually brought it up on a call earlier this week, which is great. Can anybody else think of another group that you could approach with that idea of the shared outcome to get them to commit some time to helping you with this process? I'm sure there are more, but we'll leave that question unanswered for the moment, I guess. Anybody else have any other questions as we wrap up the call this morning? Ooh, good question, Max. So Max is asking, when selecting people to interview, do you want to interview the average Joe, the involved community leader? Which do you suggest? I would suggest both. I think what's nice is to have a good cross-section of your community if you can do that. And so maybe having someone who's a parent in your community but isn't involved with your efforts at this point. Having someone who's a community leader, having someone who's a youth, having someone who's a pastor, whatever it might be, I think having both of those will give you a more well-rounded group of answers that will be a good reflection of the overall perception of your community. You're welcome. Other questions?
Claire, can I jump in and just give a few reminders before we close today?
You sure can.
So just a reminder, and I know this has been said, but don't start your interviews until mid-October. And so that's the time frame that we've given. So of course now you can be identifying people to interview. You can schedule those interviews, but don't start any of the interviews until at least the week of the 13th. I know that's not too far away, but that's kind of the time frame that we've set. We want you to be able to provide as many services as possible up until that point, and then you can start your readiness process. Be thinking about the holidays as well when you're scheduling with folks. It'll probably, as you get into December, it's going to be harder to catch people. So if you can get a lot of your interviews done the end of October through maybe before Thanksgiving, early December, that would be ideal. And then you'll be submitting, it's on page 12 of the guidance document, it's the Triethnic Readiness Assessment Results. And so that is the document that you'll submit to IDPH. So are there any other questions before we close up today? So Claire is showing within the guidance document the triethnic section, and there's quite a few pages that focus on details that Claire's talked about today. So this is the document that you will email to IDPH. And it is in the guidance document that's up on the SPF SIG website. There's a project closeout folder that houses the guidance document where all this information is listed. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. I want to thank you all for participating today. Thanks to Claire for presenting this great information, and let us know if you have any other questions. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.